3 years into Trump's presidency, the list of perceived enemies continues to expand. For decades, the GOP cast itself as the champion of the FBI, CIA, Pentagon, and other national security institutions. But over the past 3 years, Republicans have repeatedly turned on those agencies, casting, quote, unelected bureaucrats as the true villains of the impeachment scandal. Joining me now is Greg Miller, national security reporter for The Washington Post and the lead author on that piece that I've quoted so extensively from. Greg, good to see you tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You wrote about what has happened to some of the career officials who've been swept up in this impeachment. What effect is this having on the Foreign Service itself and on the career civil servants who make the government run?
I think it's hard to know the full extent of the damage that this is causing, and it may be something that we don't really come to grasp fully for another generation or so. I mean, the recruiting numbers for the State Department have been down the last couple of years. Morale at the State Department is near all-time lows, or at least lows in terms of recent historical standards. But, you know, the environment inside the government right now in many of these places is so toxic and so hostile in a way that I just don't think the broader public fully comprehends what has been unleashed here. And so our purpose in writing this story was to try to document what it is like to live through that firsthand, day after day after day.
Right. And history has shown us that whistleblowers always have a tough time, or people who come out against either their companies or the government often have a tough time before history writes them into the noble characters that they are. But I want to ask you about something you wrote in your piece. You say, quote, some of the responsibility for the mounting collateral damage falls on career officials and political appointees who took jobs in the administration despite deep objections to the president's view. These officials hoped they could steer the unconventional president, who has an affinity for autocrats and aversion to traditional allies, toward more conventional views and policies. I think there's a lot in those couple of sentences that you've written there. There are a lot of people who joined the government at the beginning of this term, who stayed in government, having been career people, saying, we can keep this ship from going off course. When you say they bear responsibility, what do you mean?
Well, I think we felt that it was important to acknowledge in our story that these were people who made decisions to work for an administration led by a president whose views and whose conduct is something that many of them actually find abhorrent. So, I mean, this is the ultimate dilemma of the Trump-led government we are living through now. I mean, their ability to find people who come in with any level of expertise, say on Russia or on Korea or on very highly consequential matters of national security, who have views that correspond to the president's, is really difficult. So in case after case after case, you have people agreeing to take jobs out of a sense of duty. And you know, one of the things we point out in the story is that Trump now has turned on these people, right? He has repeatedly called them never Trumpers, when in fact they are the opposite. They agreed to join this administration and take jobs that others refused to take at some personal cost. But them being so out of sync with the president on his policy agenda has created and fed this internal friction that we're writing about.
Your description of what's going on with Fiona Hill makes it hard to understand how she continues to be able to come in and do her job every day. Vindman, same thing, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman.
Yeah.
How are they actually able to do their jobs under this sort of pressure and with this sort of isolation?
I mean, as a moment ago used the word duty, and I think that is a very meaningful word for people like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, who continues to go to work at the White House each and every day and to do what is supposed to be his job. Now, I mean, what happens with his work product is an entire another question. This is somebody who is there to help manage policy on Ukraine. And he is there writing reports and analytic papers and things like this that don't go anywhere near the president. I think it's just astonishing. He's been in that job for such a long time, never spoken a word with President Trump, never had any interaction with him except for the president to taunt him and insult him in public.
For your piece, you also spoke with Steve Bannon, the president's former chief strategist, who's called for the, quote, deconstruction of the administrative state. Do you get the sense that there's an actual plan at work in the Trump administration to undermine what they call the deep state or the administrative state?
You know, that's a great question, and I think that I would say it probably goes too far to say that there is an actual coherent plan underway, and it's because you have all of these different agendas. We spoke with Bannon in part because when he came in as one of President Trump's principal advisors early on in the White House, this was his declared war on the establishment. He wanted mass removals of public officials from all ranks of government. President Trump never really has a lot of hostility toward the government, toward the CIA and the FBI, but he doesn't think in those sort of ideological terms the way Bannon does. And so Bannon ended up being purged at one point. What I think is most startling now is the fact that much of the Republican Party has now embraced this aspect of Trumpism, where it's no longer as it was early in the Trump presidency. You had him attacking these institutions, and then you would have Republican defenders out there like now deceased Senator John McCain. I mean, the entire Republican Party has embraced this idea of attacking these institutions to protect Trump's presidency, and that has really thrown things off balance in our democracy.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.